again to Keith, Francis, Chris and Juergen for joining us on this discussion about, I should point out really, it seems, on a discussion about Australian-European critical mineral, EU critical minerals relationships. We have one German, 2 West Australians, and then 4 people born in Britain, which Maria, maybe you can pass it back to London, that we're at the vanguard here at Paydirt for the reintegration of Britain into Europe. So thank you very much for leading that. Juergen, I want to come back to you, and I'd like to take up actually that point that we just talked, that was just raised there about, and I think we use Northvolt as an interesting start to that, because, you know, they were the great hope of the European battery and EV vertically integrated industry. They've obviously fallen by the wayside this year. At the same time, we've seen, it appears that we've gone from this European-only resilience in the supply chain to something more nuanced, something that brings in other investors, whether from China or from North Asia, Korea, Japan, or even the US. Is there a more nuanced approach in Europe now to this idea of supply chain resilience and independence?
Look, to be honest, I think the question is, was it ever realistic to have an all-European supply chain and only European supply chain? So I think we live still, luckily, in a globalized world, even though some countries want to change that. So we have strong partners globally. We need to and want to rely on a global supply chain. Of course, we want to also reduce dependence, want to reduce risk. But if you look at that overall picture, then in my point of view, it makes sense to not only look at Europe for that battery supply chain and to be more diversified. So of course it's sad what happened to Northvolt, but that is one case. We are also in a massive dip at the moment, and the next uptick is going to come hopefully sooner than later, and then we hopefully don't see failures like that anymore. So I think, summarizing, I think we need that global supply chain. We will have manufacturing in Europe, also battery and cell manufacturing. But let's look at the global story. And maybe just to allow me to comment on what the gentleman said earlier. I think bans should be the last measure. In the end, we need to decarbonize our world. We need electric vehicles here in Australia, everywhere around the world. The Chinese make some pretty darn good electric vehicles as well, as do the Germans and other nations. So let's not ban, let's rather make sure we all play on a level playing field, and that can be done by carbon taxes and similar measures. And I'm all up for that, but I don't think banning anything is a good solution.
Thanks, Juergen. Francis, I mean, in your discussions, it seems you actually mentioned earlier on developing and enhancing that Chinese-led technology in a DLE space. Is that the way you see the future of a globalized technology and globalized investment at more localized levels of manufacturing, for instance?
Yeah, 100%. I would fully agree with what my colleague said earlier. I think, I mean, yeah, if you look at what China has done, they have developed the best electric vehicles in the world. I think the only exception is Tesla, but they've got the best batteries, they've got the best software. There is no other way. There has to be, we have to use Chinese electric vehicle technology and the batteries as well. Otherwise, you know, we're set back 15, 20 years in terms of those EV targets. And I fully agree that the way it's going to play out is, and it's already happening, you're going to get joint ventures with Chinese companies in Europe to build together with the, the older automakers in Europe. They're going to build out that supply chain together, just as the West has done in China for many years now on the internal combustion engine side. So that's already happening, and I think it will continue to accelerate. I mean, Northvolt's I think, Northvolt serves as a sobering example. They tried to do everything. They had the best of intentions. They tried to be fully integrated, and they tried to go to everything from raw materials to final sort of battery product. It was very difficult, and I think they took on too much. But I mean, there's so much going on in the European battery space with ACC, with Verkor. It is getting built out, and it has to get built out. Otherwise, the European automotive industry will be no more, and it's the biggest industry in Europe. So I don't think that's going to be allowed to happen. I think there will be a dial which is turned up and down. Look, Chinese companies have received massive state support, no doubt. So there has to be a little bit of adjusting, leveling the playing field as you let in this technology, and there has to be those local partnerships so local people are employed. But European auto manufacturing, I don't see that going away anytime soon.
Thanks, Francis. Phoebe, can I turn to you? Both Juergen and Francis mentioned the levelling of the playing field, and that came from, suggested through state funding or state-sponsored financial support. But there's also an accusation, whether true or not, of Chinese production that they're not playing on a level playing field when it comes to commitments to sustainability, to carbon reduction, and those sorts of areas. Is there a reckoning coming for those imports in the next couple of years, imports into Europe from those raw materials in the next couple of years?
Yeah. Oh God, that was loud. Sorry. Yeah, 100%. So I think it was about last week now, what was released is the full regulation set out for the sustainable eco product design, or eco design for sustainable products is what it's really called. And what that fundamentally sets out is every single product, of which it covers textiles, tires, chemicals, electronics, batteries, all of it, has to go through this ESPR regulation. And if you do not do it, you legally cannot sell your product on the EU market. This covers imports, it covers manufacturing of products outside of Europe, and then, of course, importing them in, and then, of course, if you're going to manufacture the product in Europe itself. And so it does not really matter if you are importing your products from Asian countries, or if you're an Asian company who is manufacturing the product in Europe, you are still need to going to do this, of which that ultimately will level the playing field across everything. Now, when it comes to critical raw materials, this is where it gets a little bit different. So the ESPR really impacts large-scale companies and medium-sized companies. However, the main raw materials impacted are things like iron and aluminium, which is, of course, as well as steel, as well as then furthermore, let's say, downstream products, which are those batteries and the actual car manufacturing itself. However, what you do need to do is fundamentally you have to do a life cycle assessment, which of course incorporates your Scope 3 emissions. So if you are an Australian lithium producer, you will ultimately be part of that supply chain. So I will say is definitely a leveling of the playing field for any product that is going to be entering the European market, as well as, of course, being manufactured in the European market. And there is, of course, there's still the discussion around tariffs, as well as then green premiums. I personally see green premiums not necessarily as a premium or not at the moment, but more of around if you are going to supply to the European market, it's whether if you comply or not, and if you don't comply, then legally you can't sell your product. So that's really where that premium is going to come from, if you can sell your product or not. However, Financial Times released, I think, about 3 days ago, the LME are still pushing forward with actually releasing green premiums on the market for nickel, cobalt, and zinc. And then also you've got Neometals released a couple of weeks ago that green steel is actually still being pushed at a premium, and that the Nordics especially are buying green steel for a premium of around 200 to 300 euros per ton, compared to normal steel, which is being sold at around 150 to 175 euros per ton.
Yeah, it's a really interesting development in that, whether it's EVs at all costs or a more level playing field, as you say. Ben, I just want to turn to you, first of all, and I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball here, because last night I was watching Ed Miliband's press conference from International Energy Agencies Summit, Energy Security Summit in London last week, and he made a really interesting point of the discussion of critical minerals and of the energy transition is not just one of the transition now. It is as much part of energy security as it is decarbonisation. Is that the approach that we're seeing increasingly from the UK government, that the opportunities that lie here are not just in decarbonisation, but in energy security as well?
Thanks, Dom. Yeah, completely. Since I was last on this stage about a year ago, we've had a new Labour government in the UK, and at the core of what the new Prime Minister Keir Starmer set out within days of being elected was that the number one mission of the UK government is growth. As a subset of that, they've announced a new industrial strategy which will focus on 8 sectors that we see as essential to the UK's future growth, and a big part of that is energy transition and energy security sort of baked into that. What that means for critical minerals is that they will be releasing a critical mineral strategy that's been developed alongside it, and that will look at international partners like Australia, who will be key to that security and resilience of supply. If I stop talking about strategies for a minute, which I know governments quite like to do, since being elected, they've also announced a new National Wealth Fund, which is prepared to take equity stakes in projects. So I think they announced in January just shy of £30 million for restarting a tin mine in Cornwall, another one of those legacy mines that referenced earlier. And that's a sort of a willingness by government to intervene where the market isn't providing investment to secure security of supply. There's also a new offtake financing product announced by UK Export Finance, which is the Export Credit Agency equivalent of Export Finance Australia, but in the UK. And they'll be coming out to WA in a couple of weeks to promote that with projects here, because they can finance overseas mines where they will supply to a UK exporter via a long-term offtake. So that's, again, where will we be prepared to intervene to secure that security of supply? And then to sort of draw that back through to national security, that's, I think for me, probably the thing over the last 2 or 3 years that I've seen as a growing opportunity for partnership with Australia and with other like-minded countries around the world, because we've talked a lot about lithium today, and obviously this is the Battery Minerals Conference, so I can understand why. But really, there's probably more of a role for government intervention in those kind of more bespoke metals or products like rare earths, antimony, where defence supply is small, but if you don't have that defence supply, you've got a lot more to worry about than perhaps some fluctuations in supply for your other energy transition industries. Yeah.
Thanks, Ben. Francis, I'll just I'll ask this of Chris, actually, because you already have multiple commodities in your portfolio. Looking at your projects and also Francis's, it strikes me what Ben said about different commodities as well. Can you 3 companies are a rarity in Europe of developing new resources, whether recycled brine or hard rock. Can your strategies be applied in other commodities? Would similar companies see support for investment and financial and government support if they were applied to other commodities as well, do you think?
Yeah, look, I couldn't see why not. Certainly our experience in Finland has been that it's probably the most investment-friendly jurisdiction I've ever come across in 30 years. From a local, state or national level, the support that we're getting is fantastic. And I understand from other Australian companies that operate in that jurisdiction, they share the view. They're in different commodities. I mean, I can't personally speak, but vanadium is not on it's on the critical list, but not the strategic list, is my understanding. But notwithstanding that, we have the EIT as a shareholder at a project level, and then we've got the EIB doing cornerstone debt, and Finnish government guaranteeing 80% of the face value of the commercial debt, and capital subsidies, and it's nirvana.
Thanks, Chris. While we talk about that financing, Keith, and then Francis, perhaps, All three of you have received grant funding or low interest debt funding from development banks and export, as Ben and Juergen have both, export agencies as Ben and Juergen have both mentioned as well. But all three of you mentioned that last final bit, that equity component being the most difficult part, particularly in the current lithium market. Is there a chance that as non-traditional mining projects that finance may come from non-traditional sources? That are you expanding out from the traditional financing, mining financing sources?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we sort of gave some clues to that, talking about the raw materials fund from the German federal government. You know, it takes longer, and it has taken longer for that fund to be set up and to take effect, and, you know, for our application to go in. But, you know, that's something that we have, a reasonable expectation will be part of the financing mix. So that's equity, and that is non-traditional, and that is state-backed. I know you mentioned the British scheme as well, which is similar. So I think those types of schemes will be seen more and more. From our perspective as well, we also have a number of, you know, strategic corporates we expect to be part of the phase 1 project, and each one sort of gets something different from the project in various ways. You know, whether that's you know, helping to build the project with us. So I think it's not sort of necessarily your traditional financial investor who will look at your, you know, first phase of production. It's more of those strategic corporates, and then it's your government-backed equity, I think, is the way the market's going.
Keith, is that a similar situation for you guys? Are you looking at different sources for that equity and final finance package?
Yes, certainly at this stage, Dom, we are, and, you know, we're a little, from a project timeline perspective, a little bit behind where Francis and Chris, for that matter, is. But if you're referring to what we, you know, here in Western Australia would think of traditional equity finance, I think it comes in this sort of environment, this sort of lithium price market, that comes at the end. And, you know, as you know, running the company, you look to enhance the value of your project, your market cap, your equity, etc., through the other mechanisms, through bringing the strategic investors, through bringing attractive debt packages, you know, from people like EIB or whatever. Hopefully get a re-rating on your share price, your market cap, and make it more attractive for, you know, your traditional, you know, Aussie equity investor.
Thanks, Keith. We're rapidly running out of time. I knew this would happen. We've got to start the next session 5 minutes ago, so we've got time for just one more question. I'm going to take it to Juergen and then to Ben. We've been talking here about 3 projects based in Europe and financing those projects based in Europe. But one of your slides, Juergen, mentioned a company like Ecograph, which has a graphite project in Tanzania, and the funding that it's received there. Ben, I know you mentioned UK Export Finance, who would prepare to fund projects here in Australia, but then third countries as well. Do you think Europe and Australia have got a partnership to enact in regions like the African continent, where we're already seeing strong Chinese interest, strong Russian interest, strong Middle Eastern interest?
Most certainly. I mean, what you've seen, or what you can see in regions like Africa, is that Europe, for example, is not present at the moment, and you know, Europe had a dark past in Africa, so in no way do we want to repeat any of that, but supporting the local industries there with investments is certainly something Europe should do. And what, for example, China is doing in Africa, it on the face of it doesn't look too beneficial in many cases for those African nations. So if there's a way to do it in a better way, then I would certainly be up for that. I mean, let's do it. You know, that of course it's risky. You know, and what you've seen with a couple of gold companies recently in Africa, where their CEOs were detained, and so yes, there is risk in those jurisdictions, and of course that's, I guess, what makes it a bit more complicated, and why European investors are more hesitant to invest in these regions. So there's reasons for everything, but I would definitely encourage to be stronger in these jurisdictions.
Ben, obviously the London market itself has had a long history in funding African mining projects. Is it something you can see being a fruitful region for Australian UK co-investment?
Definitely. I was struck when I moved over here middle of last year just how many Perth headquartered Australian companies there are with projects in Africa, many of whom seek liquidity on the London exchanges, which obviously have I think the highest proportion of international listed companies of any exchange in the world. So investors who understand those risks and are willing to invest in them more readily. Also, as you mentioned, UK Export Finance has quite high credit limits for lots of countries in Africa. They fund a lot of infrastructure there, and so are sort of worth speaking to if you're looking to include UK content in your projects. And it can be the difference between that commercial loan from the bank or not. Another interesting angle that I've sort of become aware of recently is bilateral investment treaties, which are essentially an insurance policy for foreign investors in a country. They have protections for investors. The UK has, I think, 105 bilateral investment treaties that it's agreed over sort of many years, and that's your sort of ultimate recourse if there's one of those risks materialise. We've got a big diplomatic presence in Africa and lots of countries there, which again can be quite a useful sort of person for companies to reach out to your local embassy or high commission when some of those risks might materialise, or to sort of for advice on how to engage with the government around permitting and that kind of thing. So I think there's a real rationale for Australian mining companies to look at the London markets, or a corporate structure incorporating London for that bilateral investment treaty protection. And it can, we see an increasing trend of that, and I'm looking forward to. I'll plug Africa Down Under now, so you invite me back. I'm looking forward to that later in the year, when we'll hopefully meet more of those companies as well.
Great. Well, thank you, Ben, particularly for that plug for Africa Down Under as well. But unfortunately, we're out of time. I knew this would happen. This is a conversation we could have for another probably 2 hours. There's a lot of information there. I will remind you the live stream is there, and each of the presentations will be up on